So what is the biology or the biological reason that we have post-trauma problems? Well, the first thing to realize is that you are missing key information about how to fix these problems, as to also about what are they. People tend to assume that post-trauma problems are logical because most things in our life are based on logic. We have some kind of problem, we try to logically figure it out. What am I going to eat today? Well, I'll think about it. However, it turns out with post-trauma problems, these kind of things originate in the middle part of the brain. That's the limbic part of the brain, or the part of the brain the same as a rat or a dog, and this is not based on logic. So ironically enough, or maybe sadly enough, logic tends to cause problems and get us stuck. Additionally, people don't realize that post-trauma problems are not just a theoretical problem that we think about. It's actually things that we can see in our brain. You can see it on an MRI or fMRI, that the pathways that we activate when we have these post-trauma problems are different than when we have usual memories and usual activation of prior experiences. So how does logic cause problems for us? Well, there's a variety of ways that logic can cause problems, but there's 6 specific ways that I'll be talking about more in depth about how logic gets us stuck. The first thing is that logically we're unable to feel safe. We always feel in danger, and no matter what we do, we can't feel safe. The second thing is we can't calm down. We can't feel relaxed. We tend to feel threatened for no obvious reason, and this causes problems for us. The third thing is our emotions feel out of control. We can't stop ourselves from having overwhelming feelings of anxiety, sadness, feeling helplessness, and we just want to make it go away. The fourth thing is that either we feel numb, or, as I mentioned before, overwhelming emotions, and we can't really fix our problems if we're just feeling numb or just out of control and panicking. The fifth thing is that our experience tells us that we shouldn't talk about it, shouldn't tell anybody else. And the sixth thing is our experience and our belief is that the kind of changes to our thoughts about these negative worldviews are permanent and can't ever change, because logically this makes sense. Additionally, we don't realize that thinking alone does not fix post-trauma problems. For example, if we're very jumpy, we may say, well, next time someone comes up behind me, I'm not going to startle. Or next time I hear a car backfire, I'm not going to jump. But that's physiologically impossible. And the reason for that is the middle primitive part of our brain reacts a lot faster than our human brain. So that in terms of just time, it takes about 12 milliseconds for our middle primitive brain to react. If we see a threat, a sudden unexpected movement, 12 milliseconds later, we'll start to react. We activate our fight or flight response. It takes about 30 to 40 milliseconds for a human brain to react, so that by the time we know logically what's going on, we've already jumped. So it's actually impossible for us to fix it. The best way to do problems like hypervigilance is to actually change the environment. We have to set the stage. An example of this is if you've had kids in the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts that did a pine wood derby, you would know that you make the car and you put all the work into it before you put the car in the starting block. Once the car is in the starting block, you can't do anything. Just whatever car is the fastest wins. So the key, once again, with fixing the problem with hypervigilance and many of the other post-trauma problems is to set the stage, is to create the conditions for recovery to occur. Post-trauma problems happen because of automatic involuntary learning. The key point is that a lot of the problems we have because of trauma are things that we can't control automatically, and this can be extremely frustrating. One thing that happens very often is that we have trauma triggers. So the question is, how do we get these? Well, a trauma trigger happens because at the time of a traumatic event, our human brain is busy trying to stay alive, trying to help other people, but our primitive middle brain is also busy. It will take in sights, sounds, tastes, smells, anything that's going on at the time of the trauma. For example, in my picture here, if something traumatic happened and you happened to be outside and there was some grass that was green, your primitive brain might make a connection between the green grass and feeling really anxious. Then later on, when nothing else is going on that's bad, you may see some green grass, and all of a sudden, for no obvious reason, you feel anxious, you feel horrified, have other trauma memories. And that's because the middle brain has made a connection between these two things. The other thing that happens in an involuntary way is that we do avoidant behavior. One of the symptoms of PTSD is that we avoid things. And the reason this happens is because our brain tries to figure out why things are happening. If we're in a grocery store, for example, if we're in Walmart, and then all of a sudden we feel anxious and nervous, but there's no obvious reason, but of course, nobody in their right mind would think, well, my primitive middle brain is activating a memory. That's not how we think. So we try to look around, identify why we're feeling scared. We can't figure out why. We think something about Walmart is making us anxious, and so we leave. Or maybe we're with people, and so in the future we avoid crowds, or we avoid having a good time, because positive emotions can be triggers. And so increasingly, we avoid more and more things that are important in our life. So, what is the biology? Well, biologically speaking, PTSD, or traumatic grief memories, are essentially different biologically than normal processed memories. And they're different in 4 different ways. The first way that they're different is that normal memories are things that we control when we want to think about them. So for example, if I said, I want you to think back when you were in high school, think of something you did after school. It could be something fun, something you didn't enjoy doing, maybe homework or a chore. But you probably haven't thought about this in a long time. And you think about what you want to think about it, you don't think about it, you don't want to think about it. A trauma memory, as we've mentioned, is triggered involuntarily. We think about these things even when we don't want to think about them. They're triggered by the middle part of the brain, not the top part of the brain. Another way that normal memories are different than trauma memories are that with time, this is something that's probably some way the worst aspect or the most important thing to understand. With time, normal memories have a decreased amount of emotion. So for example, let's say in high school, you played soccer, you were very good at it, you won a big game, and you scored a goal. If you think about that now, you may have been very, very happy at the time, but now you're not going to feel as happy. Or maybe you tried to score a goal and you missed, and you're very upset, you let everyone down, and you're very sad. But once again, time heals. The intensity of the emotion that you experience now is much, much less, either positive or negative, than it was at the time. Trauma memories are the opposite. The intensity of the emotion that you feel at that time is not nearly as bad as it becomes over time. Many, many people have told me that things become 10 times worse. A year, 2 years, 5 years later, the intensity of the emotion that they experience is 10 times worse than when it actually happened. What makes it all the more disturbing because the assumption is that it should go away. It's been 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. So why is it still bothering me? And why is it getting worse and worse? Another way that normal memories are different than trauma memories is that they feel like they happened in the past. Once again, back to my example with soccer. If you think about a time when you played soccer, you can imagine that you were playing soccer, but it doesn't feel like it's happening right now. It feels like it happened in the past. Whereas when you have a trauma memory, if you have a flashback specifically, it feels like it's happening right now. It can feel more real than what's actually happening to me. And once again, it's extremely disturbing. And lastly, the way that trauma memories are different than ordinary fully processed or normal memories are that normal memories tend to be linear, organized, they fit together, all kind of make sense. Same example, being a little redundant, that's okay. With my soccer example, if you think back to when you were playing soccer, it all kind of makes sense. You know, the beginning of the game, middle of the game, end of the game, you know what happened. For many people, and this is true in part because when you're very, very stressed out, your volitional or your conscious memory shuts off. You can remember part or much of a traumatic event as a bunch of disjointed sounds, sights, smells, You may move your body a certain way and it triggers weird emotions. So they're just disorganized sensations. And once again, that can be in itself very, very distressing.